What it do, what it do. This is the Brothers on Books podcast, where we find great books that will give you real value and actionable steps and have fun in the process. Please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you would like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to this would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. I am Jack Allweil, and with me, as always, is my brother Alex Allweil in sunny Tennessee. Al, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Jack. It wasn't all that sunny today. We've pretty much had constant rain the past 2 or 3 days, which has been it's been a downer on my pickleball training, but
I did finally get a pickleball session in last week, but I have been running, so I've at least been staying in some shape.
Okay. I guess that just prompts me to ask you, we got our tournament in around Memorial Day coming up. I just got to know, Jack, have you been practicing?
Well, I like I said, I finally got to practice last week, so I mental reps, and I thought I did pretty well last week. So,
all right, it is mental reps are important. It is a very mentally taxing game.
Yeah.
So I guess with that said, you want to get into it. So
what are we reading?
So
what are we discussing?
Yeah, really, what are we discussing? The book we read is a book called the Dictator's Handbook: Why Bad Behavior is Almost Always Good Politics. And this book was written by Bueno de Misquita and Aleister Smith. So I picked this book when we were doing our draft, and I found out about this book when I was at a different book club, actually. And we were talking about, at that session, we were discussing Intellectuals in Society by Thomas Soule, which is a very heavy sort of political science sort of expose on really how politics and the economy and just sort of cultural factors go into life. And then someone brought this up, and, it sounded interesting, so I figured I'd give it a shot. So our first author, Bueno de Misquita, got his doctorate in political science from our alma mater, which is the University of Michigan in 1971. He's authored or co-authored 16 books.
Wow.
From 2001 to 2002, he was the president of International Studies Association, and he is currently a Julius Silver Professor of Politics and director of Alexander Hamilton Center for Political Economy at New York University. And then he's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution in Stanford. So he's a pretty
impressive guy.
Pretty impressive man in the political science field, I guess. Aleister Smith appears to be a little younger. He's currently a professor of politics at New York University. He previously taught at a school you nearly went to, Washington University in St. Louis.
Okay.
And ironically enough, he did a PhD in political science from Rochester. And this is really the odd one. He got a BA from Oxford in chemistry. Yeah, it's sort of it would be interesting to talk to him about how he chose a career, because I don't get how you go from chemistry to decide you want to do a doctorate in political science, but Dang. What do I know?
Dang.
So I guess with that said, that brings us to our first ad. Pickleball, the greatest sport you've never heard of. Pickleball is the fastest growing leisure sport in the United States. It is a mix between tennis and table tennis. However, don't let the average age of participant in this sport fool you. The game has fierce competition, and only the will of a champion can thrive. Go buy some paddles and balls and play pickleball, the greatest sport you've never heard of. So I guess even though you just sort of said you've been practicing, I guess, a little bit. I guess I've been practicing for both of us.
Okay.
Probably honestly too much. I'm probably playing too much.
Okay. Well, you got to play a lot if you want to go pro. So
yeah, that is at least partially the goal. So I guess with that said, Jack, what were your thoughts after finishing? How did you feel?
The first like probably 10, 20 pages, I was like, Al, you picked a bad book. and then and then I kind of got into it. And then I was like, wow, this book is actually like really insightful, and it's talking about things I never think about, and really everyone should be thinking about. And so I give this book a thumbs up.
Okay,
What
that's
did
good.
you think?
Uh, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it was a little long. They sort of kept coming back. I felt to the same. Just they kept making the same point, just sort of using different examples to make the same point.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I guess I mean I don't really have a problem reading longer books, but I think this could have probably been 50 pages shorter, 50 to
Mm-hmm.
100 pages shorter. But other than that, yeah, I really enjoyed it. It brought up some I thought very good points, parts that were, you know, uh, depressing in many senses that these types of things happen, but good to be knowledgeable of and aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think living, in a free place, it's good to read up on this stuff. And as I get older, I used to think, poli sci was such like a joke of a major, kind of with like history. But now I find as I'm getting older, that I enjoy reading those types of books actually maybe the most of any other type of book. Kind of weird.
Well, I guess not to get snarky, but I would still say, due to the fact that you can just read books on your own and pick up the knowledge, that inherently, in my opinion, sort of makes it not the greatest major. Uh, actually, in a different book I read, there's a different the author put out a point, but there's a difference between know how and like know to,
Mm-hmm.
and something where you want someone that has like how to do something, being like a doctor or mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
You need something specialized, but in something that's somewhat theoretical and like abstract, it's not being an expert in that field is not as I guess desirable. Uh, that was from that was from Talib actually.
Oh, okay.
So someone will be reading, I guess, later. But I guess with that said, so how do you sort of want to start this? I guess the
Think.
main thesis, the main thesis, in my opinion, would be the sort of interplay in these three types of categories that the authors lay out uh, in how to define citizens in a country. So those would be interchangeables, influentials and essentials, right?
Yeah.
So I guess
Yeah, I think.
how
Well, yeah, part of the book, a good takeaway was to stop treating governments like such black and white um, forms. I guess don't just say like, okay, this country's free, and this country's tyrannical or dictatorship. It's more thinking in these three types of buckets, and I guess so. So when you say um, the broadest bucket are the interchangeables. And there was another word he used for that called the nominal selectorate, which is the pool of potential support for a leader. So I guess in our government, and this is also known as interchangeable, he refers it to as interchangeables. I guess this is anyone that is eligible to vote. Is that
yeah,
safe to say?
that's correct. That's how I interpreted
And like,
interchangeables.
and when they do the analogies to like, I mean, we'll probably touch on like public companies. An interchangeable would be any, shareholder, essentially.
Correct. Yeah. So I guess in the book they make an analysis comparing
Yeah.
sort of democracies and autocracies, and then I guess just publicly traded companies.
Yeah. And then although everyone everyone eligible to vote, can vote, there's really a smaller group within the whole bucket of interchangeables that are really influencing the final outcome. And the other word or other phrase he uses for the influentials is the real selectorate. And those, include those who are actually or truly influential. And I guess so in our government, what is the influence? Is that
I
the
think it's
electoral
actually
college?
the electoral college, and at least in our government, I believe it is the electoral college, and I believe that's what they say.
Mhm.
And he goes on to say that since the electoral college is so closely tied to how the states vote, the difference between the interchangeables and the influentials is very minimal. And I guess a government set up like the states, but that is not always the case.
Yeah.
And
And then
I guess
go ahead.
going back to sort of the publicly traded company analogy, the influentials would be large shareholders.
Mhm.
So, some shareholder with just a generic like over 10%, ownership in the company would be considered an influential. Someone that's going to have a substantially vested interest in how the company does.
Mhm.
So then the last bucket, as you aptly called it, would be essentials, and the essentials are the people necessary for the current members of the government to keep power.
Yep.
So I don't remember what he said, and I don't really know who the essentials in or who they would define the essentials in the states to be.
I actually don't. I mean, I was getting kind of confused. I wasn't sure if, or you know what, maybe what it really is interchangeables are really everyone eligible to vote. Influentials are the people that actually vote, and then the
Oh,
essentials would maybe be the
the
electoral
electoral
college.
college.
And
Okay,
that's why maybe it's so good because the essentials and the influentials are
are
so,
essentially the same.
yeah. So the more the larger number of essentials, you would think the greater the outcome for everyone will be. Is that would you agree
Yeah,
with? Yeah, that's kind of,
that
yeah.
is one of the key. That's sort of a key thesis of the book
Yeah.
is that the larger the number of essentials, the more you have to go to a public goods versus like a private rewards type of mentality.
Yeah.
And I guess
Because
tying that back into our sort of publicly traded company, the essentials would be a board, like the board members of the company,
yeah.
and then in a pure like autocracy, people that would be deemed essential in most cases are high up military leaders that have control of the military,
Mhm.
or uh, that's at least what I would define it as. And then you would have some type of dictator, and I guess in a publicly traded company, the dictator would be the role of, I guess, a CEO. Uh, would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what they're getting at. So the takeaway there is stop thinking in, you know, democratic versus tyranny, and instead think in terms of these relative sizes of these interchangeables, influentials, and essentials. So let's see, what else do we got here? How about taxation? So I guess in the governments that tend to have smaller essentials, I guess that would be more of what we would think of as dictatorships or
Autocracies, yeah.
yeah, less free. and well, I guess we would say they, they're really deciding more based off of their own intentions instead of looking at everyone. And thus they'd probably want to tax, because for each additional dollar, if the essentials are a small number, then they get a pretty big chunk of that.
Right. Like, I guess the takeaway I had was the the less freedom you have, it's more likely you're going to face higher taxes. And I think he brought up the tax rate in between China and I think us, or China and maybe Chile. I should have written this down, but the percentage that Chinese people were paying in what was considered like a communist government was like 3 times the amount adjusted for adjusted for income, or sorry, adjusted for differences in salaries.
Yeah, I think it's mostly the lower income brackets where the China seemed kind of oppressive, because like in the U.S., like if you're in one of the lower tax brackets, you're not really paying much in tax. But
that's correct.
In the yes. lowest tax brackets in China, you might be paying still. It sounded like 40-50%.
It seemed like a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a lot.
So I guess my main takeaway from this like taxation was it was sort of cyclical. Like when you're in an autocracy, the dictator wants to tax at a high rate, right? To sort of, you just kind of use the citizens as like a piggy bank where you can take everything from them so you can pay your friends and pay yourself to keep you guys in power and have a good time. As you begin to run out of money, because if people are taxed at a high rate, they don't want to work hard because they don't get to keep as much. The governments tend to then run into money problems where they can't pay everyone. And this then leads sort of to the government has to sort of liberalize. They have to become more free in a sense. And they have to sort of ease off on the taxing and give people more freedoms such that they work harder. So sort of like what you said, you can go from taking a bigger piece of a small pie to a smaller piece of a big pie. So I guess the main takeaway I got was that when you have higher tax rates usually are associated with less freedom, and lower tax rates usually mean you have more freedom. Just sort of as a general rule, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, there's this because you mentioned the pies. I mean, there's kind of a balancing act. I mean, at the end of the day, they want to optimize, received tax revenue. So, is it where's that like sweet spot on taxes they should employ to generate the highest taxes? Because as you said, if we're getting taxed less, then I work an additional hour, I get to keep more and more of that. So I have more incentive to work, and lowering taxes might actually increase the total tax revenue received. So the person in charge might be thinking, oh well, maybe we should actually lower taxes here.
Yeah, there was also he brought up the interesting point in talking about revolutions when populations were likely to revolt. And from what I remember, it was not when I would have expected them to, because he was saying when you have a highly oppressed group of people, it's unlikely that they'll revolt, mainly because they just can't.
Because they're probably either too sick or scared. Well, yeah, they might be too sick,
scared,
perhaps,
hungry, just unable of, and then a lot of times it's unable of organization. Like they don't have the means to communicate how to do it. Yeah.
Now, one of the interesting things they brought up that kind of had to deal or in relation to the taxation. So, I mean, one way to raise revenues to tax, but another way would be to just like if you weren't after you've done taxing your people so much, you could if you had access to some resource, you could basically rent it out to other countries to come and they could mine your gold or your silver or get your oil, and you could get money that way too as a leader. And but they referred to it as the resource curse because those countries that are rich in natural resources tended to be, I guess, poor or just like less free, maybe.
Well, it tends to be the most oppressive, right? Because like so the countries that would sort of fall under those guidelines would be countries sort of like I guess modern day Venezuela, a lot of resource rich countries in Africa. And I guess what I took away from it was what what causes a government to go from sort of an autocracy to a more democracy is when you're an autocracy and you can no longer pay your essentials, like your essential coalition, to keep you in power. Because a lot of times, as they point out, these military leaders are doing in autocracies, it's usually the military are doing really awful things to make sure you stay in power. So they need to be paid a sizable amount of money to essentially keep, putting down revolutions and just sort of killing the peasants. Uh, you need to pay them a lot. And when you can't do that, you have to allow more freedoms to generate sort of more of an economy to raise sort of taxes in that way. But when you have rich resources, you as the dictator can essentially just sell all of those resources, and you don't really care what your employer, your citizens do.
Right.
The
Yeah, you just
taxes,
cut them
the
out.
taxes no longer matter, and then you can be totally oppressive to them. So, yeah, I mean, I think Venezuela is on the top of my mind, the country that comes to uh, my mind
Well,
quickest
what are
right
they?
now.
I forget. Is that what are they rich in?
Oil,
Oil?
yeah, and just I think a complete I would say government failure currently.
I don't really know what's going on there, but I keep hearing like they might not even be a country in a little bit.
Yeah, it's not. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I remember hearing like they were paying. People were being paid in foodstuffs for the necessary amount of calories needed per day, which
Ah,
is probably not good. But you're being paid at like the minimal amount of caloric rate.
uh-huh.
I also don't know if that's true. That is just something I heard.
Okay.
Something also that comes into sort of what they deem as the resource curse is that when you're rich in resources, you're then able to borrow more money because outside lenders feel like you have a higher likelihood of paying the money back. So you're deemed less of a liability, so they'll lend you more. And this yet again allows autocracies to be more oppressive because on top of selling the resources, they can just borrow money to continue to pay their essentials and the military leaders, and they can continue to stay in power that way. So, sort of one of the things that they claim is one of the best ways at sort of forcing dictators sort of to sort of liberalize and go towards a democracy is to not allow countries debt forgiveness, which was very counterintuitive to me before I read this. But after they made the argument, I think it makes a lot of sense. So I don't know. You may be better at explaining this to me than me, but I'll sort of just give it a go. So, sort of what they're saying is that when a country has a high debt burden, uh, when you then forgive the debt, people will then lend more to them. Is that correct? Am I explaining that correct?
Well, I think you kind of get lulled in that they kind of give you lip service like, oh, it'll be different this time, and we got all these projects set up that are going to be so productive, and or at least that's the way it kind of depicted it in the book. And I guess that could be, I mean, you could kind of see it just like at a micro level with like people, but like just think if we forgive like student loan debt, I guess. Like um I, it's like the yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is that a good analogy, or maybe not?
So, well, I was actually going to, I
Because
was going to bring that up later. In sort of funny, you brought it up right now. I was going to bring that up later. But the way I think of it is, the reason they're saying that you shouldn't forgive debt to these dictators is because then the dictators are able to get
it,
a easier line of credit to go and continue to oppress their citizens.
yeah, I would say yeah, that's kind of what I would say too. Yeah, because it kind of removes the incentive for the people to revolt, or the rest of the world to revolt on that regime.
And I guess due to their thesis being the best way to sort of democratize autocracies is to force uh, dictators to give their people more freedom. And the best way to do that is to force them to have to generate more revenue, really from taxes. And you do that through allowing more like economic freedoms that take place when you sort of take off some of these oppressive measures and you lower taxes. I guess that's sort of how I think I would explain it.
Okay.
Anything you want to add on that? On that?
I don't think so, really.
That note.
Well, I guess. I guess we're going to talk about like foreign aid in a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go on to education. This one was kind of interesting. And I never thought of this in this way, because they brought up the fact that, North Korea, for example, has, it sounded like basically 100% literacy rate. And I was like, wait, does that sound right? Like, I thought they were like, held down and oppressed. Why do they have a near 100% literacy rate? And then they go into it more, and that for countries that are less free, they still want people to be able to work, and to work, but they don't want to educate them so much that they then turn around and think, wait, this isn't right, we should change this. Like, they don't want their authority to be questioned, but they still want the lower education to be good. I thought that was pretty interesting. And they brought up the fact that I think it was just China and Singapore were the only countries that had kind of less freer governments that had a university in the top 200 universities in the world.
That's correct. The other point that they brought up was that in all of these dictatorships, all of the children of the essentials go abroad.
Yeah.
For school. So, I mean, a lot of them, I think it was from North Korea. A lot of those kids are educated at like Oxford or Cambridge or in the States, where the local population, for the most part, gets, I would say, what's analogous to a high school education like here.
Mm-hmm.
So what I took away from that is, they want the basic, like the baseline amount of education to go into, I mean, what I can only imagine as they view them is just sort of like cattle that they can milk for money.
Robots.
They need them to operate at a very minimal level. So they give them very minimal things. And I think that goes into the other categories we have written down here, being healthcare and water, right?
Yeah.
So like Venezuela yet again, or Cuba in the 70s, or I guess Russia, socialized healthcare, right? Everyone gets healthcare. in these sort of autocracies, and that's because you want your workers to, if they're hurt, you want them to be taken care of and then put back into the fields to continue working. The sort of interesting point that they brought up was the baby mortality rates, I thought, which is that the child mortality rates in those countries were substantially higher than they are in sort of democracies. And at first I was like, well,
go ahead, sorry.
Well, at first I was like, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But when you look at it through the lens of a child isn't producing anything for you right now, if you look at it through that view, it does make sense, because the child is essentially worthless to the dictator, so they don't really care a whole lot. They care more about the young adult to middle-aged worker.
Yeah, and they're once again operating more from their own view and catering to their small group of essentials.
Correct. Yes.
Whereas if you have a bigger group of essentials, then people are like, oh, we should, have it so we're not having so many babies die.
Yeah,
because these are our babies.
Right. The focus, when you have more essentials, the focus switches from private rewards to public goods. So when you get into more of democracies, the healthcare for everyone becomes better, and then the education you get at a higher level, and then probably one of the last things we get written down for this section, water. So in America, I don't think I know anyone that doesn't have access to clean water. But they were saying in some of these autocracies that it was some huge percentage of the population. I think I don't have this stat written down.
It was amazing. I don't remember the number either, but I remember being alarmed.
I think it was like 80% don't have access, and this was in Venezuela. I think it was 80% don't have access to clean water. Some just almost unbelievable statistics. Actually, they brought up another good point about I think we'll probably touch on this in a bit, but about sort of like groups going to some of what we would deem like third world countries and building like water purification plants and schools, things that I always thought were good, but the authors sort of argued that was bad.
He's basically arguing that you're taking a job away from one of the locals, right? And you're not really you're not really providing something to them that they could not provide themselves. And I think
not only that, but you're allowing the dictator not to, the measly amount of public services they provide, you're allowing them to get off the hook of doing even that. So you're allowing them more sort of more money at their discretion.
Yeah. Because I think he had a story where he went to some school and they wanted the whole group to paint walls, right, in the school.
Yeah.
And he's like, nah, I'm not doing that.
Right. Out of principle, he refused.
Yeah. He was saying, someone in this town could do this job, and instead, I think he showed some of the kids like his camera, or he was teaching them some tech that basically no one else would have been able to teach them at that point, and that was kind of his argument there. So what else?
So I guess the next tidbits we have,
FIFA.
Is we have something you're probably pretty pretty good on FIFA.
So this was actually even so I mean the same principles of interchangeables, influentials, and essentials can be taken to any sort of structure. And they talk a lot about businesses, and they also talk a lot about these organizing bodies, and they brought up the International Olympic Committee and FIFA. And I mean, the International Olympic Committee, I didn't know it was so tiny. I think they said the essentials was only like 40 or 50 people or
So
some small number.
one FIFA, it was either FIFA or the IOC. One of them I think was 24
That was
or
FIFA.
22. That was
FIFA's in the 20s. Yeah.
okay. And
Yeah,
I
but I
think
mean, yep, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say then the IOC was around 40 then.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're bringing up these points that when you have such a small number of essentials here, I mean, the likelihood that one of these people could be bribed goes up and up, and it might not even cost that much. I mean, you pay the one guy, and like for example, I think they brought up Salt Lake City um, hosting the Winter Olympics, and I think the cycle before they didn't get it, and they kind of thought there was some like tampering. So 4 years later, it sounded like they might have given some sort of bribe to some of the voters, and they were awarded the Winter Olympics, but then it came under scrutiny. But of course, they didn't remove the games there. So when you do like a cost benefit analysis, you're like, oh, I only have to pay this much, and the city will get 10 times that, or whatever times that. I mean, it's a huge event. So, and in FIFA, I mean, you got 20 some people voting for the location, and that's it. So,
So
I
yeah,
mean, you can kind of see how Qatar probably got the
got the
2022
the bid.
FIFA.
Right. I think they actually said I think how much they thought they had to pay the FIFA officials, and it was I, I think it was like 500,000 an official, or sorry, in a FIFA elective.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if I'm getting that number
Yeah, I
right,
mean,
but
and that's like, think about that.
you don't
That's
even
not even that
you
much. Like
right. You don't
for
have to pay all of them. You only have to pay half plus one.
yeah,
And that's if my number is right, you're then paying around $6 million, and you've gotten access to the World Cup that brings in billions and billions of dollars. I mean, you shouldn't blame Qatar, right? You should blame FIFA for
yeah,
being set up like this, or for
yeah,
having people that take the bribes.
yeah. I guess that kind of brings up the question, like, how do you actually go about changing something like that? How do you go about changing the number of essentials?
So yeah, so well, they just argue that you should have more people voting.
Mm-hmm.
Something I was thinking about this actually as I was eating dinner. I was thinking that you need to have, or something I would say is, I think you need to have stricter punishments for people being caught taking bribes,
Mm-hmm.
and not just like monetary bribes, but really bribes of any type of means. Because I think in for the Olympics, they were talking about the IOC getting these extravagant parties, these
Mm-hmm.
shows, like operas being sung for them to try and entice them to select them. But
It
if
kind of
you
it's like tough to. I mean, how do you go about like enforcing that too? Like who? I don't like who's in charge of. It's just.
yeah, so with FIFA
I
it's
mean,
weird because it's like who is in charge, but like in a government, if a government official is caught taking a bribe, I don't know, I don't even know what the penalty is, but you would think that the penalty should be so great that no official would think to take a bribe. That's at least how I would set it up.
mhm. Yeah, but I guess yeah. I mean, yeah, you're right. You need more essentials, but the people that are essentials currently, they probably like having their power. They like being
Right.
one of the few. So how do you how
That's
do
that's
you
that's the
yeah, I
number
mean,
one rule in being a dictator. You want to keep your essentials small.
yeah,
So you
so it's
don't yeah.
yeah, because I think they did bring up like, why don't you allow every single person that's medaled in the Olympics to have a vote? I think they brought up some. I mean, and
Yeah,
that's a cool idea.
that I thought that was a good idea.
But how do you get the Olympic Committee to, well, like, why would they want to adopt that? They don't. They don't.
Yeah,
want to.
they themselves don't. I mean, I think you would need the people to essentially embargo or sort
Yeah.
of not embargo. I don't know if embargo would be the right word, but to sort of boycott them, I guess
Yeah.
is what I was
I
trying to
guess.
say.
Yeah.
To
Yeah. I
say
guess.
if you're not going to do this fairly, we're not going to watch.
Yeah.
Uh, so
Yeah. I
sort
mean,
of with no, keep going.
I was. Yeah. You kind of need like a revolution, but at the same time, like I think like, man, it would. I would like. I don't really like the FIFA structure, but when the FIFA World Cup comes on, like I can't really turn it off. Like I'm like addicted. Like I can't. Like I would find it hard to. I mean, I know there's certain countries. I heard Norway's considering boycotting. Now I don't really. I don't know how much weight I give to like Norway boycotting the World Cup because they're probably they might not qualify anyway. So I don't
Yeah,
really
I
know.
don't think.
But if
I
you
mean,
had
Norway
like
has some.
go ahead.
Brazil,
Yeah, if you had like a Brazil or a Germany that end up boycotting like a
Italy,
World
yeah,
Cup, well then
Italy,
maybe
Spain.
yeah maybe there would be some change.
I mean, I guess how do you feel about the new expanded structure going to 48 teams?
For the World Cup.
Yeah.
Um, well, I don't exactly remember the official new format. I would say that it seems like the countries as a
It's
whole are getting better. So I mean that I mean that they're getting better, and
it's groups of three now.
hopefully it's not too diluted. I don't. I mean that's another 2 cycles away, isn't it? Or no?
Yeah, that would be the 2026 World Cup, but
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really know. I know they're doing groups of three instead of groups of four,
Okay.
and I don't really know how will that work because the
Well, do you
teams
think?
playing on the last day will have an inherent advantage.
Yeah, maybe. So you think there were some bribes taken for that?
Well, I
To
think
get maybe.
it's
I mean,
clearly money driven because
yeah,
you're getting more games. So
yeah,
I
you're
mean,
getting more games, and it's kind of probably artificially enabling like an India or a China to make it where you're having access to a couple billion people that like never make the World Cup.
right? I mean, same. I mean, that's honestly same with Qatar or Qatar. I mean, Qatar would have never qualified for the 2022 World Cup, and now
Mhm.
by essentially bribing the FIFA committee to give them the hosting, they are able to be in it.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess allegedly.
I guess when I look at that, I would think maybe that's more just like okay, that's like actually looking at how do we more maximize or like increase revenue, but maybe
Right, but
there wasn't necessarily a like a bribe for that one.
that's true. But I guess I guess this sort of comes back because this sort of plays out more like a business, right? Like, so who gets the bulk of the revenue? It's not.
Well, yeah,
It
it's
would
the
be the board
essentials.
members. So it would be the FIFA, the FIFA essentials. So
Mhm.
they have a huge. I guess what I'm saying is they have a huge incentive to try and maximize dollars or money, and they don't really necessarily care about the product as much. Because
Um,
I'm trying to envision how I think a group stage of three teams in a group will go, and I don't think it will be as good.
well, I guess what struck me in the last World Cup was just how it felt like the only team I thought that really didn't like look like they belonged was Saudi Arabia. E-
Arabia,
Every
yeah, they
e-
look
e-
terrible.
every other team has dramatically improved. Like the days of Germany beating a team 10-1. I don't. I think those are kind of
Portugal
past.
beating North Korea 7-0.
Yeah, like there weren't too many of those types of games. So I feel like the level overall is, I mean, and hopefully in two more World Cup cycles, hopefully we'll have even better competition, and hopefully it's not too diluted.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. The general talent has definitely increased. Uh, I guess in 2026, which will be in the States, we'll find out. Hopefully we can
Yep,
go to some games.
yep.
I think it's probably unlikely that we're going to Qatar.
Yeah.
But so actually this sort of ties into something we haven't really touched on, which is like I guess American foreign policy and how really how we deal with foreign entities if they're either sort of democratic or more autocratic. And I guess their arguments were that we, for the most part, like dealing. I guess in terms of policy, we like dealing with autocrats, right? Like because it's their point is that it's just easier to buy
A smaller number
to
of
just
people.
buy them, yeah, to buy them off. Like you don't have to give
Yeah, it's.
a dictatorship as much money as you would a democracy,
I
and you
found
can
this one of
still
the. Yeah, I
and
found
you
this
can
one of
get
the
them.
most. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. Finish your thought.
I was. I mean, I found this like one of the most interesting parts of the whole book. Like when they're talking about how democracies um are giving money to these dictatorships and why they're doing this, and it's kind of because they can be bought, and you get to be the puppet master. Whereas if this country that you're giving money to were actually democratic and they came up with some policy on their own, you might not like that policy. And they kept talking about, I think they referred to Egypt a couple times. I think Egypt is becoming more
Egypt,
democratic, right?
yes,
So,
yeah,
but basically, the U.S. was paying them, I believe, to be not so hostile towards Israel. I think, and that
correct. That
aligns
is
with
correct.
our view.
Right.
Um,
And as they were more autocratic, they weren't hostile to Israel. But as they've become more democratic, they've become more hostile towards Israel.
yeah,
Because
because
when they
like,
had a
because
yeah, when they
it's
had a dictator, the dictator could just deem that they weren't going to be hostile.
mhm.
But when he had to sort of secede power, the people, it appears from at least what they're saying, the people want to be hostile towards Israel.
Mhm. Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, democracy is good as long as it's like our type of democracy.
Yeah, they keep saying that everyone in the States says we want to like promote democracy. That's like what we say, but our actions are the exact opposite. Like we essentially we put in dictators and we don't put in democracies. And I guess they're saying it's because we can just very easily buy dictators.
Mhm. Well, what did you think about like sending? So this is kind of like paying. Well, we just talked about like paying countries to have a particular view, but in terms of paying other countries for aid for like people after like a tsunami or an earthquake, and you have some sort of dictatorship, and Americans want to send aid, to help the people. But I mean, I didn't realize this, but I heard some reports like, you know, for every dollar you send, I mean, that only maybe like 20 cents, 10 cents actually get to the people.
Yeah, so this is what I found. This is the part of the book that I found very depressing is when they were talking about foreign aid and particularly foreign aid and catastrophes is when you were dealing with some of these autocracies, you're paying. I mean, they even made it sound like diabolical, where some of these dictators were purposely putting people that disagreed with them in these like high risk zones, and then just sort of over time allowing catastrophes to kill them. I
Hmm.
think they talked about that with some of the Pakistani floods, where there was some massive. It was either I don't
No,
remember. It
that
was either Pakistan or was it Pakistan or India?
I, it was Pakistan for the floods. I think that you're thinking of.
yeah, so like they had some of these massive floods in I think the 70s or 80s, and we gave them all this money to like shore up the river to ensure that these floods don't happen. And whoever was in charge shored up the river, where his supporters lived. And then all of the people that didn't support him, he didn't protect at all. And then the floods happened again. All of his adversaries were wiped out in the floods, and then he got more aid. So he
Yeah.
continued being a dictator.
Yeah, because when
I
you get
mean, yeah,
more
it's
aid, yeah, when you get more aid, you have the incentive to not really do much, because then that'll cut the flow of cash coming in out. I mean, they also brought up when the U.S. was sending money to Pakistan to hunt down Osama bin Laden. I mean, really, there's no incentive for Pakistan to actually capture him, because then the aid will stop.
right. Yeah, exactly.
And they kind of brought up the idea of, I mean, a way to fix this would, kind of create perhaps an escrow account
Escrow.
where you send them money, it goes into an escrow account with certain objectives that have to be met for that money to be released. So that was kind of interesting. Actually, I don't know if you listened to the latest Bitcoin episode on the Investors Podcast, but this guy, I mean, he was a poli sci guy, but he was basically creating systems to directly send foreign aid to these people in dictatorships. So now you get to cut out the middleman for foreign aid. I thought it was genius.
Okay.
And it was interesting that I had just heard that after we read this book.
So was he using the Bitcoin network to do that? Or he was talking
Yeah.
about how Bitcoin would be super useful for doing that?
I mean, he brought up the fact that Bitcoin is very useful for, well, I mean, it's very easily transportable. And
Transportable.
so he was talking about some guys like in the Congo who, sold all the stuff they had, put it in Bitcoin, fled to Canada, or, these countries that have wicked high hyperinflation, they're now able to have some sort of store of value in the form of Bitcoin. I mean, some of these countries, they're basically using cows and livestock as a store of value. Like that's what they have to work with. So kind of like I mean, Bitcoin really could be a game changer for like foreign aid and really helping the people out in these dictatorships.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if it was called Strike or Stripe, but he was the creator of that app or that network or whatever. Was on the Investors Podcast probably a couple months ago, and he was talking about a very very similar thing, where he had set it up, I believe, in El Salvador, where you were just able to I mean, essentially what we were just talking about, just transfer money using the Bitcoin network anywhere in the world, very, very fast and easily. So sort of the same thing. But yeah, I mean, so sort of back to the escrow thing, I think they even proposed that you do that for the catastrophes as well. Because that, right, like if you just give the aid, there's no incentive to actually fix the problem. And
Yeah.
they sort of then did a summary. They did a summary between sort of what we would deem as more free countries versus less free countries and how they responded to natural disasters. And some of these sort of autocracies would have problems from natural disasters like 10 or 15 years down the road, still not fixed. Where in very free or democratic countries where the goal is on the public welfare, these problems are fixed within a couple of years. I guess a good example is if I think everyone in the States would say that Hurricane Katrina was a disaster and we handled it awfully, but everything essentially, I mean, I was in New Orleans not too long ago. I mean, and you could never tell that
Mhm.
that happened. But he's talking about some of these countries where they're, sort of autocratic, and you have destruction from natural disasters 20 years ago that still hasn't been cleaned up. I
Mhm.
mean, even my neighborhood, from the tornado last year, is essentially totally put back together. I mean, that was a pretty massive tornado.
Mhm.
The the emphasis is on the public good instead of private rewards. So
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think, I think when they were talking about the escrow accounts, I liked that. I thought that was a
mhm.
good idea.
Yeah, because I mean, they're talking about times depending on, like, in China. I think there was some very small town. They got like like the government didn't help them at all. Whereas, this, like, this very similar catastrophe happened in a bigger town with more influential people, and sure enough, those people got the help. I mean, and another thing they really talk about is, like, the ability, when you're in more of a democratic place, the freedom to assemble is, that's like, hopefully a right for you. And they were talking about one of the most prime time spots for, like, a revolt would be if you can assemble. And it was funny though, because during these catastrophes, sometimes if enough people get sent to these refugee camps, that's when that's an opportunity for them to actually congregate and discuss, like, yo, this isn't right. We should revolt. There needs to be some change.
Yeah, I think the example they bring up for that is the earthquake in Mexico City in the 80s or
Ah,
90s,
yeah.
where that did actually, after the earthquake, all of those people congregating did lead to change.
It's kind of, I mean, and I mean, for a dictator, I mean, if you're not an essential, I mean, you don't, I mean, your presence doesn't really matter. So, I mean, they're not gonna, like, bend over to help you out, I guess, if you're in
Yeah, I
need.
mean, sort of back to your China example, for the people that were up in that rural sort of farming town, they made it sound like the government just sort of told them to go away and die and like leave them
Peacefully, yeah,
alone. Yeah,
yeah,
it's like, man,
yeah.
what a thing to say to, I guess, your citizens. Something, yeah, something that would just never be done, or like I feel like I can't even fathom it. I mean, the other thing you talk about is like sort of the freedom to assemble is something I feel like I, as an American, probably take for granted.
Yeah.
Also, the freedom of speech. I mean, the fact that we can, get on Zoom and talk to each other and sort of complain about the government without, fear of retribution is something that is obviously not universally accepted.
Yeah. It's kind of, well, what do you think about, because they talk about, like, normally more free translates to, like, more like wealth, I guess, as a whole. But they brought up the Singapore and China as kind of less free places, but they still have high, like, monetary, like, values. But, like, they're able to create wealth, or, like, they're able to acquire things, but they're not so free. I actually didn't really. I'm not sure what I thought Singapore's government was like, but
Yeah, I mean,
they
all I
didn't.
know, I just, Peter Schiff talks about Singapore all the time and how they don't have a minimum wage. And that's really all I know about them.
Uh-huh.
But he talks about how strong their economy always is. And
Hmm.
sort of what I would guess is that, I mean, I know China, the communist government of China relaxed, they relaxed restrictions on the people to create business. So they generated sort of open markets to, I think stimulate their own economy, right? Because probably, they were so poor, the people in power couldn't get enough money through taxes. So they had
Mhm.
to allow at least economic freedom to be able to get enough in taxes to stay in power. Uh, I don't know what Singapore's government's like, but I would assume that it's sort of, at least from how Schiff always talks favorably about it, I would assume that it is a similar situation if it is truly not I guess, what we would deem a free government.
Yeah, I've heard, like, nothing but nice things about Singapore. I was kind of surprised.
Yeah, I was too.
Um, okay. Okay, this next part on war was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Because they kind of bring up the idea that democracies basically, when they go to war, they really go to war because they're operating from a large group of essentials. And if all of those, if everyone decides let's go to war, like it's almost like, I mean, can we say like they're almost like guaranteeing they're going to win, but like in their mind, like they will do whatever it takes to win.
Yeah. If the opinion I got from this book was that if a democracy is going to war, they are going to war and they're going to fight until they win.
Whereas like a more like dictatorship type place, they might go to war more often, but early on when they start getting knocked down, they might just retreat.
Yeah. And
That kind
sort
of
of the other thing was a lot of times it seemed like the dictators don't even really care if they win. Or I shouldn't say care, but it was not a necessity to win, I guess. It seemed like dictators are going to war for more private means, like how can they privately enrich themselves, where democracies are going to war for sort of like, public, almost like ideology types of reasons. And it brought about sort of, and the reason why I think the outcome doesn't matter sort of in dictatorships is back to the essentials. If, a random, if some peasant is killed in a war in an autocracy, uh, the country is not up in arms. People don't really care because so few people, the government is relying on so few people. But if soldiers in America start dying, even if we have like 100 soldier deaths, I would say it seems like that's a big deal to us as a country. We get very upset with our government and we start sort of proposing that there should be change. Where if 1,000 soldiers are killed in a dictatorship, uh, the people don't really have a huge say in what happens. I guess you can view the soldiers in dictatorships are totally replaceable, uh, almost not cared for, and that sort of goes back to how much money is spent on them as well, like the spending per soldier in dictatorships versus democracies. And I think they did an analysis. I think it was in the 6 Day War between Egypt and Israel, uh, where they talked about the dollar per spending on an Israeli soldier versus an Egyptian soldier. And it was like, I don't remember how many more multiples it was that was being spent on the Israeli soldiers, but the Israeli soldiers were all, for the most part, better trained. And the Egyptian soldiers that had the high training were kept back in reserve to protect the dictator. So they weren't even fighting. They were just used to protect one man.
Yeah, I forgot about that part.
Just sort of ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's not ridiculous. If your goal is to win, I think it's ridiculous, but
yeah. Yeah. So,
do you have any other thoughts on war?
I guess the only thought, I mean, he brings up the point that that there's never like a democracy fighting another democracy. I thought that idea was kind of interesting, but if you like put it over, if you like overlay it with that idea that we wouldn't like certain countries if they actually were a democracy, and that's kind of why we pay them and kind of want them to stay dictatorship. So I wonder what would, like, if we'll ever see a democracy fight another democracy, like, and how that would kind of play out. That would be interesting.
It would be, because I mean, I guess two people can both go to war with the sole intention of being sure they're going
Yeah,
to win.
Yeah, exactly.
right?
So yeah, I'm not sure where that game theory goes. So should we talk about what is to be done?
Yeah. So I guess you want to
Well,
summarize what their sort of their end game strategy was?
well, I guess we talked about the escrow accounts for releasing money for foreign aid. So that was one idea. I guess that I mean that
Stop forgiving debt was another big one.
yep. Um, actually, one no that yeah. I mean the big takeaway for me was the foreign aid stuff. I thought that was very interesting. And then when I heard the stuff about Bitcoin, I was like, yeah, that's great. And I mean, actually, I don't know if I've said this, but I mean, the first time I sent a Bitcoin was to my friend's girlfriend who lives in Thailand. And he was just he wanted to send her like $200 that was good for like a couple months worth of English classes. And I sent it to her on Bitcoin, like through Bitcoin. And I was like, wow, it's like amazing. And sure enough, heard it on that podcast. And yeah, that's pretty transforming if you can cut out some of these dictators that are taking, 80% of the foreign aid that we send them.
Wait, who did you send the money to?
I sent it to her.
Well, no, who is her? Who's who? What friend do you
Oh,
have?
it's a fellow actuary's girlfriend who
Okay.
is Thai. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess the other thing that they said that was their sort of end argument was that you need to always work towards increasing the amount of essentials. You need to make the government sort of beholden to more and more people. And this is actually where I sort of started, at least the way they were making this argument, I sort of disagreed with this. They were saying in democracies, you should always look to increase the number of people the government is beholden to. So, I mean, you can correct me if I'm sort of misinterpreting what they were saying, but I was getting the impression that they were saying that we should just always allow people into the country and pretty much just have open borders to make the government beholden to more and more people. And they said like short term there would maybe be problems, but long term it would be for the best. And I don't know if I totally agree with that.
Well, the open borders thing, I mean, I mean, when we did economics in one lesson,
Yeah,
I actually, when I thought about Henry Hazlitt's arguments, if you really take it to an extreme, I thought you legitimately should have basically one world system that regulates the laws, but allows free movement of people to, go where their skills are best used. But sorry if I sidetracked there. Well, but I guess allowing and he also talked about short term, like actually getting rid of the electoral college, right?
right. And I also disagree with that.
Yeah, because that one's interesting. Well, and because I mean we talked about that on the Constitution
Constitution,
episode.
right?
So
I mean,
and I
in my opinion, yeah, the point of the electoral college is to make sure that the majority does not. The point of the electoral college is essentially so that they've like, in my opinion, flipped how the electoral college is being used because the original reason was to make sure that the minority is not abused by the majority in the electoral college.
mhm.
But they're sort of arguing that by using the electoral college, you can have less essentials, which is maybe true, which I guess is true. So they're saying that you have less essentials. So they're saying if you get rid of it, you would have more essentials, and that would make the country freer. But on the same note,
But yeah,
uh,
on the same note, if 51% of the population moves to Rhode Island
right,
and votes
you
one way, but geographically it's like, yeah, I think I disagree with getting rid of the Electoral College.
Right. Just like, just because, just because you're in the majority does not mean you're right, is I guess what I would say. And like sort of actually how I was going to bring up student debt is through this. Like I know I disagree with student debt forgiveness, and I think you do as well. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right. But it seems, and this is sort of a good example of just what I would say is pandering and vote buying, is that this is being proposed literally just to try and buy votes.
Yep.
And just because, everyone says, or, a majority of people say they want this, I don't think it's right you're essentially then forcing everyone that doesn't have student debt to pay for everyone that did have student debts, school. I don't think that's right.
Yeah. I
Um,
believe the phrase is divide and conquer, and that was kind
right.
of a dividing point for a lot of people. And yeah,
And I
yeah,
get
you just cater to the numbers, and yeah, you kind
right.
of just trying to get the votes.
Yeah, and if you listen, I don't know, I was sort of behind in listening to his podcast, but if you listen to Peter Schiff's podcast, he had a great I don't think we need to get into it right now, but he was talking about these Georgia voter laws where, as far as I can tell, all it's saying is you need an ID. And he brought up the fact that essentially if you're unable to, figure out how to get an ID or take the time to go get an ID, yeah, he doesn't want you to vote because you're not an informed voter. And if you're not an informed voter, you shouldn't be voting because you're going to vote for essentially, just free stuff. And in his opinion, free stuff means that he's paying for you to have stuff.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think he proposed raised the age to voting to like
to
30 or
30,
something.
30, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to that old saying, if you're not a socialist in your 20s, you have no heart, and if you're not a conservative in your 30s, you have no brain. uh and he's like, he only wants he very clearly only wants conservatives voting.
Yeah.
uh
So,
which is,
do you have a favorite like message from this book, or something you're going to take away?
how I view our interactions on the global scale is definitely something I will probably look at a lot closer now. I don't there wasn't a particular quote that stuck out to me that I can remember. What about yourself?
Um, I think one thing that continues to be reinforced, because like sometimes when you're like trying, what am I trying to say? Like when you are trying to make a decision and you're thinking about what you actually know, like when you really go to like first principle thinking, um, the the thing I always come back to is like the incentives matter. And I think this book just reinforces that, just to constantly be thinking about how people are incentivized. And actually, I mean, really learning about the AIDS stuff, I am even more bullish on Bitcoin than I was before. And I was very bullish on Bitcoin before.
Yeah, I actually bought some more Bitcoin. I Right when it dipped down again, I got some more right at 51. Uh,
Very nice.
I hadn't bought. I had sort of taken a hiatus from buying some, but I when it dipped down, I'm like, all right, I think it's going back up, so I bought some more.
Yeah, because I mean, it really could. I mean, it really can keep some of these governments in check, um, and protect
Yeah.
a lot of the little guys. So,
I mean,
um,
yeah, I don't think, going back to Schiff, as now the back half of all of his episodes are why Bitcoin is worthless.
Yep.
I don't think you can argue that being able to send someone money 24/7 anywhere in the world is worthless.
Yeah.
And I think the Bitcoin network is incredibly useful.
So, yeah, sure. Hopefully you're listening.
Maybe we can get him on.
We should. He wrote a book, right? Or his dad wrote a book.
He's written numerous books.
Okay.
But
Yeah, we
his
should get him on.
dad wrote a book that was banned. Banned in the US country, in our country. One of the only books to be banned.
Hey, we got to get our hands on that.
He sells it on his website.
So, wait, because it's based in Puerto Rico or what? But Puerto Rico is still.
I think it got no. I think it was reinstated,
Okay.
but he definitely. If you go to Shift, because I remember looking it up because he's written a couple other books. If you go to I think Shift Books, maybe shiftbooks.com, you can buy both his father Erwin Schiff and then his books, Peter Schiff's books. I think his father actually just died. He was in jail for tax evasion for a long time. Yeah, the book was Why Taxes Are Essentially Unconstitutional. I think that's what the book's about.
Doesn't surprise me a Schiff would talk about that.
Yeah, I see where he gets it from.
So, well, should we send it out?
Yeah, I think so. This has been a
pretty good.
I think this has been a good talk. Yeah, so please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you would like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to, this would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. As always, I'm Alex. With me is my brother Jack. We are the All Wild Brothers. And Jack, what's our next book?
So we did some reshuffling of our book selections, but we will be talking with the man that wrote Laird Money, Nick Bhatia, and I believe currently it is the #1 book on Amazon for monetary policy. So that is going to be a very interesting discussion. And if you want to learn more about Bitcoin, that would be the episode for you.
That it would. Have you started reading it?
I've read the preface.
Yeah, I started reading it too. I thought it was, it was pretty good from what I've read.
Yep. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah. All righty.
All right.
Well, I will talk to you next time.
Yep. Take care out.
All right. Later, Jack.
Bye.